I didn't think anything of it when the bell rang at 3:08 p.m., 2 minutes early, and a little too bright for the gray afternoon that pressed its forehead against the windows. Lincoln High always had that sleepy end-of-day feeling in late October, like the building was already undoing its tie and loosening its belt. The lights hummed, the radiators ticked. You could smell wet wool and pencil shavings, cafeteria soap lingering on everyone's hands. It was just another day that wanted to be over. Then the intercom clicked, and the whole school inhaled at once. This is an unplanned Level 3 lockdown. Teachers initiate procedures. Principal Henley's voice carried that practiced calm, the one we'd heard every drill since freshman year. But there was a thinness to it, like the words had been pulled through a sieve and lost something on the way out. Chairs scraped, desks whispered across tile. Mr. Carter locked our door with a hand that looked steadier than it should have been. He moved like he'd rehearsed exactly how calm to be. The shades came down, soft gray rectangles swallowing the windows, phones dimmed. A few last groans quieted. Someone's backpack zipper sounded too loud, and then even that stopped. On the whiteboard, the unfinished remnant of an algebra problem stared at us like an eye. We had done this before. Lights out, voices down, cluster along the far wall. Away from the door, hushed, and waiting until a knock and code let us return to our chairs and pretend nothing could ever actually go wrong in a place with pep rallies and English essays. The ritual had a boredom to it that felt like safety. I am telling you all this so you know how normal it was, right up until it wasn't ET. At 3:10, the intercom clicked again. This is an unplanned Level 3 lockdown. Teachers initiate procedures. Same words, same cadence, not the same voice. I glanced at Mr. Carter. The little notch between his eyebrows showed up, the one that appeared when someone asked if test grades would be curved. He looked up at the square speaker in the corner, then at the door, then back at us. He put a finger to his lips, the universal sign for every kid's old instinct to hide. Phones came out anyway. Screens glowed in tiny constellations of blue. The group chat lit up. What the hell was that? Was that Henley or nah? I think it was. Sounded different. Shut up, Mia. I can deep breathe. Is this real? Or a drill? They said, unplanned. I hear sirens. I don't hear sirens. There were no sirens, just the building's heartbeat. That soft electric hum. Then, faintly, the air handling system chuffed and stopped. The room leaned into silence. Our door had that little rectangular window at eye height, thick wire mesh glass, a penny-sized dot of the hallway's world if you pressed your face close. Mr. Carter stepped closer to it, peered, and his breath fogged the glass. He wiped it with a sleeve and peered again. He didn't say we were fine. He didn't say anything. The intercom clicked a third time, but what came out was not an announcement. It was the alarm test tone. 3 short bursts, one long, jagged, and high, like a knife drawn across ceramic. All our bodies knew exactly what to do with that sound. Every muscle went tight. Every breath shrank to the size of a coin. Someone whimpered in the corner and smothered it into a cough. Mr. Carter's phone vibrated. He checked it with his back to us. The blue light cut across his cheekbones. He stared for too long, then turned the screen over and slid it into his pocket, as if the phone might change its mind if he couldn't see it. "What is it?" I mouthed. He shook his head. He didn't mean nothing. He meant not now. The hallway lights flickered. It wasn't dramatic, no cinematic, theatrical strobe, just a hiccup in the current that made the room's shadows pulse. Then everything returned to the same dull brightness and the same held breath. It was 3:14 when we heard the first footsteps. They were distant. They were steady. They did not belong to a panicked teenager or a teacher trying to look brave. My brain, in a sleepy, unreasonable way, thought, "Janitor." My skin said, "No." Step, step, step. A pause. 3 short taps on something hard. 1 long drag. No one spoke. You don't in a lockdown. That's the point of calling it a lockdown and not a party. Mr. Carter slid down the wall beside the door, squatting so his eye could line up with the window. He had that look adults get when the world insists on being much worse than the manual said. He held his breath long enough that I had to swallow, not to cough in sympathy. The footsteps approached unfussily, as if they had a floor plan and a list of rooms to check. The pattern repeated. 3 quick taps, 1 slow scrape. And even though it didn't make sense, every animal part of me wanted to be smaller. Across the room, Mia's screen trembled in her hands. She was screen recording the chat. The little red dot blinked. The thought that maybe the world would need to see us later sat in my throat like a lemon seed. Beside me, Darius whispered without meaning to, "Why is it level 3? Level 1 was hold and secure. Level 2 was shelter in place. Level 3 was the one that required you to imagine where you would hide from something with hands." We didn't have to imagine for long. At 3:16, the footsteps stopped outside our door. If you've never been a part of that kind of silence, I don't know how to make you feel it. It is the kind where your heartbeat is the loudest thing you've ever heard, and you want to apologize to your friends for the noise. It is the kind where the shape of your breath inside the mask you forgot to throw away feels like an offense. A soft pressure moved over the wire mesh window, as if a palm had settled on the other side of the glass. You could feel it without seeing it. The hallway lights did their small, irregular flicker again. The intercom clicked. Nothing came out. Then something leaned toward the window. Not a face. Not exactly. More like the idea of weight. A smudge of density where the glass looked slightly darker. I've replayed it 1,000 times since, slowing it down, asking myself if there were features. I remember the sense of being looked at far more than I remember what was doing the looking. Mr. Carter put 1 finger to the door lock just to feel it under his skin. His lips formed 1 word that he didn't say. "Please." 3 quick taps on the metal just above the handle. 1 long scrape across the wooden panel. 3, 1, 3, 1. The rhythm of the alarm tone played by a knuckle. Someone in the back started crying quietly. They pressed their sleeve to their eyes and made the kind of promises inside their head people make when they want to be invisible. I will never be loud again. I will stop making fun of Mr. Carter's corduroys. I will get a B in algebra. The pressure at the window moved away. The steps continued down the hall. I do not know how long we sat like that. Time in a lockdown doesn't work like time in a hallway between classes. It lengthens and melts. It argues with you. I know that at 3:22, the emergency lights came on and the main lights went off, plunging the room into the kind of half-dark that makes every familiar object look like someone crouching. The emergency lights were sodium-colored, amber, and sick. They buzzed the way flies do against a screen in summer. The intercom clicked and spoke again. "This is an unplanned level 3 lockdown. Teachers, initiate procedures." I could tell you it was Principal Henley's voice, and in court, I would swear that I believed it when I heard it. But later when we listened to a dozen recordings from a dozen brave phones. We started to hear what we hadn't let ourselves hear then. It was a voice that had listened to Henley and gotten most of the way there, the way you can say someone as name after hearing it once and be close enough to be polite. The vowels were a little narrow. The register slipped at the ends of words, as if it forgot what human speech should do when it runs out of air. Across the courtyard, somewhere not far away, a door slammed. The sound came in as a body blow through the old building's bones. It made the shades on our windows tremble. My hands had gone numb, not pins and needles numb. I mean skin that didn't belong to me. I clenched them until the knuckles popped, just to feel some belonging. Mr. Carter made a decision then. He took out his key, slid it into the lock as silently as a key can slide, turned it so barely the bolt shifted, then turned it back to where it had been. He looked at us and mouthed, "Stay." He stood. He moved along the line of us, his shoes whispering on the tile, and counted with his eyes. 19. He gave a tiny nod, as if 19 was a number the universe could be trusted with. A minute, maybe 2, then footsteps again. Closer this time. Or maybe the emergency lights made them sound closer. They stopped outside room 210 across the hall. We couldn't see the door, but we could feel it. The focus shift. The way you can tell when a conversation you're not part of has changed key. 3 quick taps, 1 long scrape. A muffled voice through the cinder block. The distant vibration of a teacher telling kids to breathe. A knock answered the taps, soft and brave. A teacher's code. 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock, pause, 2 knocks. The pattern, the one you only use when it's over. Silence. Then the handle of room 210 turned. I didn't know 210's door was weak. I know it now because it sounded like a mouth opening in a bad dream. It caught halfway and then surrendered with a hollow click. We didn't hear a scream. I am grateful for that in some backward way that makes me feel small. We heard the teacher's voice change shape. A murmur flattened into paper, like a sound put between 2 panes of glass. Then the taps again, 3 quick, 1 long, retreating down the hall. At 3:33, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. No text, just a photo. When I opened it, the screen went black for a second and came back as a grainy, overexposed rectangle. It took me too long to understand it was a still from a security camera. The kind that looks down a hallway so everything is slightly bird's-eyed and slightly wrong. At the far end, near the doors to the staircase, a shape stood in the wash of an emergency light. The timestamp read 3:31:52. The shape had the outline of a person if you were inventing people from memory. Arms a little too heavy, head a little too still. Where the face should have been, the image had saturated to white, as if light were pouring out backwards. I looked up at Mr. Carter. He looked at me and nodded once, a grim "that's real" nod. Then my phone vibrated again, and again. The sound too loud in the quiet. 3 short buzzes, 1 long. I showed him the screen. He watched my phone shake with the rhythm and put his hand around mine so it would stop. We weren't the only ones getting messages. Across the room, Darius turned his phone over and over, as if the back might say something the front wouldn't. Mia's eyes were wide and wild above the blue square of her face. One kid, Kevin, whispered a prayer I recognized from funerals, his lips moving without sound. I wondered how old you had to be for the prayer to work, and felt like a thief for wanting it. Some fraction of a lifetime later, 4:02, the clock on the wall said. though I would have put my fingerprints on a Bible and testified it was 20 minutes at most. The building breathed a different way, the kind of pressure change a house makes when a door opens somewhere and a cold front walks through. The intercom clicked and played static. In the static, a voice you could almost understand said, "End of," and then lost itself in something like wind. It tried again and found the same blank place, then gave up on words and played tones instead. 3 short, 1 long, the pattern of the new weather in our bones. The thought came to me as if it were not mine. If it has a pattern, it has rules. If it has rules, it started somewhere. If it started somewhere, someone can turn it off. I'd like to say I had a plan. I had a need, which is not the same thing. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to stay in the room until the idea of outside grew as thin and unbelievable as summer. At 4:09, Mr. Carter moved like someone who had held the thought still long enough to trust it. He took out his keys again. He mouthed, "Camera room." He pointed at his chest, then at the ceiling, then toward the social studies hallway, where the small square window marked security office sat like an uninspired punctuation mark. He mouthed again, "Stay." And then his eyes did something for each of us individually. A small check-in, a small thank you for existing. I shook my head, and he looked back at me with the weary resignation of a person already halfway down a road. I pointed at myself and then at him. He narrowed his eyes in a "don't do this way." I nodded in a "I am doing this way." In a better story, he would have stopped me. In this one, he weighed the math of the universe and tilted his head toward the door. We were wrong to think the lock would be the loudest part. It clicked with a polite throat clear. The loud part was the absence of sound on the other side. The hallway so drained that our breath sounded like swimming. He opened the door an inch and listened. The emergency lights cast a long, low syrup across the floor. Dust drifts looked like small animals poised to run. The green exit sign at the far end washed the world in hospital color. We slipped through like a secret too soft to be heard. Lessons learned in 100 drills showed up quietly under our feet. Stay low, hug the wall, avoid the middle of the corridor. Listen before you move. The building had its own language in that silence. The little ticks of expansion, the yawns of old wood. Somewhere, a locker, imperfectly closed, creaked as if something inside tried to remember the combination. We passed room 210. Mr. Carter looked once, as if looking might knit a ripped place. The door was ajar by an inch you could not write off as an accident. I held my breath and leaned against my better life, just far enough to see inside. The desks were empty. The far window shade was down, but light found a ragged path at the edge and made a pale stripe on the floor. On the teacher's desk sat a phone, face up, screen cracked into a spider web from some old drop. The camera was on, recording the empty room, which meant someone had touched it recently. In the center of the stripe of light lay a yearbook, open to a page half full of faces. A black pen had filled in a name where there hadn't been one, as if the printer had forgotten and the day had remembered. I didn't step closer to read it because I didn't want the name. Names are doors. We moved on. The security office sat at the end of the hall, a square of glass you could look into and see exactly what you hoped for. Monitors, a radio on its cradle, a rack of old keys that probably didn't open anything anymore. The door was locked. There are locks designed to make you feel like you're safe from the world, and locks designed to make the world feel safe from you. This one belonged to the second group. Mr. Carter slid the silver ring around in his palm. He had too many keys, which is a way of saying he had a job and no power. On the third try, something turned. We slipped inside and the door clicked closed with a sound that felt, for a breath, like winning. The room smelled like coffee that had been bitter, even when it was fresh and sweat dried into a chair. The monitors glowed, each one looking at a different slice of the school. The stairs down to the cafeteria, the west hallway outside the art wing, the glass doors by the parking lot, the lobby with its trophy case of the last time anyone believed a town could be persuaded by a ball. The camera in our hallway showed the emptiness we had just walked through. I watched our own door for a long second, half expecting to see the past, us pressed against the cinder block. Nothing, just the thin, flat light and a paper someone had lost in their hurry. Mr. Carter tapped a keyboard to wake the system properly, and the screen bloomed into a grid. The timestamps in the corners walked forward in second-long steps. He clicked to bring up cameras A1 through A4, the main corridors, and then B2, the staircases. On A3, something moved. It wasn't a person walking. People swing their arms, even when they're trying to be quiet. Their bodies remember rhythm. The figures slid along the edge of the hallway. Like a roll of darkness, someone had leaned against the wall and nudged. The emergency lights haloed around it, as if the light itself were choosing a careful distance. It paused at each door and tilted its head. No, that's me giving it too much human. Tilted its presence as if listening to the metal. 3 short taps, 1 long scrape. When it reached the camera, it stopped and turned to face it. I have seen raccoons stare into a lens and look like devils. I have watched bored men in hats become loiterers because a camera was there to witness their boredom. I am telling you, this was not an accident of light or the mind as hunger for faces. The darkened oval where a face would be stayed blank for 3 seconds, and then something stood up inside it that looked like numbers. It's a lie to say numbers. It was the suggestion of numbers. Shapes that might have been digits unfurling and collapsing too quickly to be read, like someone had taken every locker combination in the building and shaken them in a bag behind a veil. 3 seconds, and then the face went calm again. Calm, the way a shut door is calm. The radio on the desk, the one with the label Security 1, crackled with life. A voice hissed through. It didn't say words. It breathed. 3 bursts. 1 long. Phones, Mr. Carter whispered. We both tried. No signal. It wasn't just the bars missing. The phones had decided they were small black stones. The emergency call screen still opened when I swiped. The numbers still glowed beautifully. The call connected to nothing, to a silence that made you feel lonely in every decade at once. We wait until it goes to the lobby, he whispered. Fire door from here. We go to the auditorium. Back exit. The alarm will... 3 short knocks rattled along the security office door, like someone drumming impatiently on a table. 3 fingers in a row. 1 long drag traced the metal. Slow, deliberate, tender, in a way that made me want my throat to close. We hadn't heard footsteps. There hadn't been time for footsteps. I looked at the monitors. In the lobby on A1, empty. In the art wing on C2, empty. In our hallway on A3, the camera showed the office door. A smudge of reflected light where the handle sat. A ghost of ourselves in the glass. As we watched, the ghost darkened as if something on the other side breathed once, deep. I pictured the door code, the silly little sequence you memorize the first week you get a badge. 25525. 5-2, a pattern easy enough to remember and dumb enough to make you feel like you were part of a system. I pictured the door, deciding we were not part of the system. The knocks came again, softer this time, as if the thing outside had excellent manners and we were the rude ones. "Do not," Mr. Carter mouthed and put his palm flat against the door near the hinge, far from the handle. He closed his eyes. I don't think he was praying. I think he was listening, the way you listen, for a storm to turn away. On the monitors, in camera B2, the staircase to the cafeteria filled with a gray mist. It wasn't fog, it was static. Television snow, but heavier. Too thick for a screen, like the air had been filled with the idea of interference. It poured down the steps and pooled. In the pool, something like handwriting flickered. A date. The day the school had run its first lockdown drill. Years stripped away by numbers. "Why?" I whispered, and didn't know who I was asking. The intercom, as if it could hear me, clicked. Static washed through. In it, a voice like an old recording said, "Do not," and broke. The alarm tones followed it obediently. 3, 1, 3, 1, like a heartbeat that had learned a new pace. The PA speaker in our little office was too small for the sound. It rattled, tinny, shocked by the force of its own message. The figure on camera A3 stepped back from our door and moved on. We heard the 3 taps translate through the wall to the classroom next to us, then the long scrape. It paused after each door, as if tasting. It didn't hurry. There is a flavor of horror that sprints, dripping, teeth bared by its own momentum. This wasn't that. This felt like a census. When it turned the corner toward the science wing, we let out breaths that we had promised God we would never let out again, if he would just get us through the last 2 minutes. The radio hissed one long note, a held breath, and fell silent. We left the office. Our mistake was believing the hallway would be the most dangerous place. The most dangerous place was the space between breaths, when you think you have done something right, and the world is about to give you a cookie. That's where the teeth live. We slid past the door to 208, where a paper chain of construction paper leaves still dangled from a fall unit on Gratitude. The leaves watched us, their little stapled stems wide-eyed. A poster that said, "You are safe because we practice," hung crooked, the word "safe" listing to the right, like a boat filled with water. We were 2 turns from the auditorium when the smell reached us, a faint ozone tang, the way the air feels when old electronics heat up. The hairs on my arms stood. I had not, until that second, known that hair could make a decision. The auditorium doors wore those heavy metal crash bars that begged to be pushed in an emergency. The small wired window in the right-hand door showed the aisle that led down to the stage, and the velvet curtain drawn across it. I could see the pale curve of the grand piano, sleeping under its cover. The house lights were off. The emergency strips along the steps shone like glowworms. We didn't need the auditorium. The back exit beside it was our goal, the emergency door that screamed into the parking lot. But the auditorium window held me. Imagine a child tugging your sleeve because if you've seen a magician slip a coin behind your ear. That was the feeling. It was the curtain. It moved. Not like a draft, not like a tremble when the air system comes back alive and breathes down on everything from the vents. The bottom hem of the curtain lifted a careful inch, and in that inch of darkness something bright wrote briefly across the floor, as if a finger drawing on fogged glass. I couldn't read it. It was too fast. It was the idea of words. We ran. The crash bar on the exit door gave under my hands like a gift, and as the alarm wail rose, loud, alive, a sound that means the world has noticed you, we stepped into the November afternoon. Cold air slapped at the back of my throat. The parking lot lay under a sky the color of metal, the kind of light that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. We stood there, stupid with relief, waiting for the alarm to be the kind of noise that calls police and fire trucks and street-curious neighbors. It wasn't. In the hallway behind us, just before the door sealed itself again, the alarm tone faltered and rearranged itself into a sequence that was not our alarm, and yet fit into the same groove in our bodies. 3 short, 1 long. The sound outside did not exist. I mean that literally. The air beyond the threshold did not carry the noise. The parking lot was quiet except for the faraway buzz of a highway and a crow that picked at something invisible in the grass. Mr. Carter put his hands on his knees and bent like someone who has just finished a race they did not enter. He looked up at the building and then at me. "Back in," he said, and I hated him for being right. We let the door swallow us. The rest of the school had not stayed still while we made our little pilgrimage. You could feel it in the way the air moved now, in the way the emergency lights seemed to have found a dimmer switch and decided to punish themselves for having ever tried to be useful. From the direction of the library came the soft collapsing sound of something being opened and set aside. In the cafeteria below, a tray clattered and rang and lay ringing in echo. I imagined hands picking up forks and putting them down without caring that no one was holding them. We weren't in the security office when the power finally died for real. Not the halfway dark of conscientious energy saving, but the full blank of a building let go of. The emergency strip stayed obediently lit, but everything else gave up. The quiet grew so large it felt like a presence all its own. It leaned. We ducked into the counselor's suite because the door was open and the room had a corner that felt like it had never seen trouble. A bowl of mints sat on the table between 2 upholstered chairs that were too soft for anyone's spine. I put a mint in my mouth without thinking, and the peppermint exploded cool across my tongue. The first fresh thing in an hour of used air. Mr. Carter stared at me like I had eaten a radioactive marble. "Blood sugar," I said, as if that made me a scientist. We listened. From the hall, tap, 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 drink. From the intercom, click, a breath, 3 tones, 1. My phone buzzed once, not in any pattern, just a small proof of life. A text from a friend in the other building, the freshman wing, stuttered into being. "Where are you? We are in 104. Someone is in the hall. The announcement won't stop. It keeps saying my name. Can you hear?" I wrote back, and the little gray dots of typing disappeared as if my words had to cross a field in which things hunted by vibration. Then a photo arrived. It was almost black. When I brightened it with the clumsy slider and zoomed, I saw the window of their door and the light beyond, and the reflection of a dozen faces stacked like coins. The reflection had more faces than there were kids in the class. Mr. Carter closed his eyes. "Auditorium," he said again, "because you can try a door more than once and still be brave." We made it to the corner of the main hall, where the posters for the fall musical had bloomed in a grid over the last month. A chorus line of smiling teenagers hoping to be someone else under lights. Someone had drawn X's over every pair of eyes with a black marker, quick, efficient slashes. The ink bled into the paper where the faces had been printed too enthusiastically, and the paper had soaked it up like skin. Something shifted at the end of the hall. Not a shape, a subtraction. The light there got thinner, the way shadow gets more opinionated near dusk. We didn't run. Running sings to the air. We slid, keeping the lockers to our left, so the panic in our shoulders had something solid to be wrong against. Halfway to the auditorium doors, the intercom clicked and spoke clearly for the first time since 310. "Lincoln High," it said, in Principal Hanley's voice with no burr in the syllables. "This is an unplanned Level 3 lockdown. Teachers, initiate procedures." It was perfect this time. It was honest. It was useless. And then, before I could decide whether to be relieved, the same voice continued without the intercom ever clicking again, overlapping itself, the way a room will fill with applause from two directions. "This is an unplanned Level 3 lockdown. Teachers, initiate procedures." Again and again. The words layered until they weren't words. They were a texture. They were a rain. The auditorium doors were now only 2 steps away. I reached. The bar was cold under my palm, a slice of winter. I pushed. The door did not move. It wasn't locked. Locks make a sound when they tell you no. This was the no of a person who does not look up from their book when you speak. Mr. Carter tried. He put both hands on the bar and leaned his weight. His breath fogged the wired glass. The fog did not look like breath. It looked like letters, tall and narrow, evaporating faster than my eyes could read them. In frustration or a kind of courage, he knocked on the door. 3 short, 1 long. The reply came from behind us, down the hall. 3 short, 1 long. I thought, because the mind in panic is rude, that it sounded happy. We moved before the reply finished. The science wing took us like a forest, a tangle of lab tables and sinks, and the faint old sting of bleach. The emergency lights had found a way to be behind us no matter which direction we faced. In the glass of a cabinet where graduated cylinders slept, a reflection watched me put my hand on a faucet and then didn't do it. I kept walking anyway because you can only argue with physics if you're planning to lose. The lab's back door opened onto the short hallway that led to the handicapped ramp, and beyond it, the outer vestibule. Another emergency exit that, legally at least, should take you to the world. I don't yet know how to tell you this in a way that doesn't to sound like a metaphor. The ramp went down farther than a ramp that short could go. We stepped onto it, and the tilt under our feet lengthened. The light at the bottom pinched into distance. My stomach lifted in that funhouse way, the sensation of going down when your eyes insist you are only going 3 steps. The air temperature dropped 3 degrees. My body remembered winter and the bruise ache in my knuckles from slipping on ice last year, flared as if the skin were an instrument someone had reached back in time to pluck. "Stop," Mr. Carter said. We did. The ramp held us, asking politely if we wanted to continue to somewhere we did not understand. Behind us, the hall breathed. Not loudly, not in a way that a microphone would have picked up. The kind of breath a room would make if it were regretting something. I turned and looked back the way we'd come. At the top of the ramp, where the bright rectangle of the lab door framed a slice of the hall, a figure stood. It was taller than the door frame. That's the thing people always get wrong when they try to draw what they saw. It wasn't taller the way a giant is taller. It was taller the way a wrong measurement makes a house that shouldn't. Continue to stand. It leaned its head, no, its idea of a head, and the emergency light bent around it. There was no sprint. There was no chase. The figure stepped to the side, and the doorway emptied. and that emptiness came down the ramp in our direction like a decision. We backed into the vestibule, the little aimless square you pass through every day and never think about. The outer door wore a panic bar and a glass rectangle that showed the evening reluctantly beginning over the parking lot. The bar waited for our hands. "On 3, Mr. Carter said, and I wanted to laugh or cry at how human he was. 1, 2, we pushed. The bar gave. The door swung, and dusk air slid across our faces with a sound like paper torn carefully in half. The alarm screamed. Outside, the world did what it had done before. Nothing. The sound stayed inside. It piled up against the doorway and spilled back over our shoes. I thought of ocean waves meeting a breakwater, the insistence of water against something that didn't remember how to drown. We stepped out anyway. The lot lay wide, the painted lines scuffed by the same feet that put their sneaker soles on the bottom rung of their lockers and leaned. Across the way, the football field waited under lights that hadn't remembered to come on yet. Beyond that, town. Beyond that, interstate. Beyond that, here. We stood in the slice of threshold that agreed to let us be both inside and out. Maybe the figure doesn't like thresholds. Maybe it can't cross them without permission. Maybe I am making rules for a thing that had already written its own. It stopped at the place where the vestibule's tile met the ramp's rubber treads. It pressed its presence against the air, the way a hand tests a pane of glass for strength. The alarm peeled around it and threaded through it and bent. The shape didn't turn toward us. It didn't have to. It was a parable about attention. The more we refused to look at it directly, the more of it there was. For a second, for the length of a single held note, writing scrolled across its face again. Not numbers this time. Letters. I have tried to tell myself the letters spelled my name, because that would be a normal, selfish thing for a mind to do, to center itself in the story in order to go on. But I have a different suspicion, that the letters were everyone's. That's what a roll call is. That's what a lockdown is. You put your finger on each name, and you say, "Here, we left." I could end the story there. It would be truer in a way. We walked around the building, stuck to the brick-like lichen, kept below the windows where emergency light drew slow bars on the ground. We moved to the far lot, and then the road, and then, running without running, to the next block where the street noise could finally find us and remind our bodies how to breathe like bodies instead of bellows. But the school wasn't done by the time we reached the corner store and pounded on the glass, with the desperate politeness of people who know they're about to make someone else, says 𝗕𝗫𝗄𝗧. My phone remembered how to be a phone. Signal bars winked on. The blue emergency banners from half a dozen stalled texts unfurled down my screen. Police, on the way, parents, calling, news, already inventing a headline. It was 5:32 when the first cruiser washed its red and blue over the cinder block of Lincoln High. It was 6:03 when the fire engine arrived. It was 6:19 when the ambulance idled in the bus lane. The vehicles made the world honest again by being loud. They went in with codes and practiced words and the kind of bravery you train like a muscle. They came out an hour later with exactly what you expect. A shrug and a promise to keep looking. Because the school with every kind of conventional scrutiny on it had become itself again. Halls, desks, a poster about kindness fluttering in air conditioning that considered itself heroic for returning. The security system remembered its job. The cameras offered their footage like a confession, There were no numbers. There were no curtains lifting themselves to write in dust. The tapes from 3:30 to 4:30 showed static, and then a polite black, as if someone had done a good job of not recording anything. On one clip, 1 second long, something stood in the lobby and looked at the camera, and the lens fogged with the condensation of seeing. You've already guessed. The timestamp read 3:31 to 52. Room 210 was empty. The yearbook sat where I'd seen it, but the ink had not filled in any missing name. The teacher's phone did not have a recording app open. The kids in 210 remember the door handle turning and then remembered nothing. Sometimes forgetting is a person. Sometimes it leaves fingerprints, and sometimes it wears gloves. In the freshman wing, a teacher swore the intercom had said her name 3 times, in a voice that knew how she said it to herself when she was too tired to say the whole thing. The recording of the intercom for that hour played only the normal announcements from earlier in the day, and a test tone that might have been a chair scraping in the office. We filed out into the night in pairs and clusters, held together by the kind of fragile thread that makes a necklace. Parents wrapped us up. Blue and red lights made the cold look warmer. Someone handed me a blanket, and the blanket smelled like a truck. I slept with the light on. It didn't help. The bulb hummed the way the school hummed, the way a held-together thing hums to keep from coming apart. I woke at 3:31 without an alarm on my phone and lay in the square of light on my ceiling and listened for footsteps that belonged to a building I wasn't in. The next morning in homeroom, Principal Henley went on the intercom and said all the things you say. We are safe. We are grateful. We are reviewing procedures. Counselors are available. He never said the words unplanned level 3 lockdown. He didn't need to. The words had moved in with us. A new roommate with a hard suitcase. At lunch, the chatter found its way into the stories we know how to tell. Did you see it? I didn't see it. I saw it. My cousin's school had something like that last year. It's a TikTok challenge to fake a lockdown. It's the Wi-Fi. It's the janitor messing around. It's a frequency. It's a ghost. It's the thing we won't name. Mia showed me her screen recording of our group chat. In the corner of the video, the timestamp ticked through the hour, and the little blue dots blinked the way they always blink. At 3:31 to 52, the video glitched. No dramatic static, no horror movie flair, just a frame that didn't belong to the frames before or after. The frame showed the keypad to the security office door. The digits 25252 glowed, each lit in sequence by a finger that didn't cast a shadow. We sent it to the cops. We sent it to Henley. We sent it to each other in the small hours with subject lines like, "Do not open unless you want to never sleep." And 3 days later, the school held a debrief in the auditorium. Parents came, strollers came, small brothers and sisters with crayons came. The curtain sat very still. The principal explained how excellently the locks had functioned and how valuable our calm had been. A police officer with a jaw that could open cans explained what to do when you heard footsteps, which, translated, was what we had done. Hold still and ask to be spared. During the Q&A, a man from the 4th row asked if the intercom could be hacked. "Everything can be," the officer said, which was not the comfort the man had wanted, and made everyone else feel both modern and alone. On the way out, I palmed the edge of the curtain, the way you do when you want something to be just cloth. The velvet pressed its nap into my skin and left a darkness there like a bruise. I keep thinking about the rhythm. 3, 1, breath, 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 hold. It lives in the way the furnace starts up at night. It lives in the pattern of car blinkers waiting at a red light. It lives in the little gaps the universe leaves for us to step across if we dare. The door to room 210 still catches halfway if you don't put your shoulder into it. The lock on the security office still pretends to be more important than it is. The ramp to the vestibule still translates your steps into a slope that feels longer than your legs. Nothing has changed that we can point at and say, this is different now. Which is, of course, how it is different. There's one more thing, and then I'm done. In the morning, when the hallways are bright with the kind of daylight that makes you forgive things, students and teachers pass under the intercom speakers without looking up. The system runs its scheduled tests at 7:45. The gentle click and the single tone that mean we are good machinery. Last week when it played that tone, the clock above the nurse AS office ticked to 52 and paused for a second longer than a second should be. Then the tone split itself quietly, like a cell dividing under a microscope. 3 short, 1 long. No one else stopped. I did. I counted the beats and felt the shape of an empty hand settle on the back of my head, like a blessing or a claim. We call it the unplanned drill. We call it that because no one planned it. Because saying we didn't plan it makes the world feel like a place where planning matters. We file the forms. We practice the codes. We rehearse the way to hold our breath. We hang posters about kindness. We tell each other that if we know the rhythm, we will know what to do when the rhythm calls our names. Sometimes, when the last bell rings early and the afternoon leans against the windows like a tired person, I look at the whiteboard and think of the unfinished problem there the day it started. The beautiful arrogance of math. The belief that all things can be brought to balance if you just keep moving symbols from one side to the other. I think about how, when the intercom clicks in an empty hall, the sound goes on traveling even after no one is left to hear it. I listen for 3 short. I wait for 1 long, and I try not to put my ear to the door.